In a frenetic week meant to overwhelm the cognitive capabilities of critics, the media, and the average citizen, President Donald Trump upended norms and policies across the government. But the president's most dramatic move took even some of his allies by surprise. Tonight, we'll try to make sense of the tumultuous first week of Donald Trump's second term. Next.
This is Washington Week with The Atlantic. Corporate funding provided by Consumer Cellular. Additional funding is provided by Koo and Patricia Ewan through the Ewan Foundation, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities. Sandra and Carl DeLay Magnuson, Rose Herschel and Andy Shreves, Robert and Susan Rosenbaum, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. Once again, from the David M. Rubenstein studio at WETA in Washington, Editor-in-Chief of The Atlantic and moderator, Jeffrey Goldberg.
Good evening and welcome to Washington Week. 4 years ago, thousands of Donald Trump supporters marched on the Capitol in order to prevent the ratification of Joe Biden's presidential victory. They beat police officers, destroyed property, threatened to kill the vice president and the Speaker of the House. Many were arrested and prosecuted for their crimes. Trump himself was excoriated by leaders of his party for inciting the mob. Of course, you know the rest of the story. Earlier this week, Trump, now the most consequential American political leader of the 21st century, pardoned most of the rioters and commuted the sentences of many of the rest. Many of them are demanding that Trump avenge their prosecutions. "I am your retribution," he said in 2023, and we would be naive to believe that he doesn't mean it. So much has happened since inauguration on Monday that it's hard to keep up on issues ranging from DEI to immigration. We'll try to unpack the week tonight, and we'll try to understand the possible consequences of the release of more than 1,500 rioters from prison. Joining me tonight to discuss all this, Laura Barrón-López is the White House correspondent for PBS NewsHour. Leigh Caldwell is the chief Washington correspondent at Puck. Ashley Parker is my colleague and a staff writer at The Atlantic. And Charlie Savage is a Washington correspondent for The New York Times. Thank you all for being here. We're not lacking in topics. I want to start with January 6th because it's nothing's really surprising, but this is a borderline surprise in the depth of the pardoning and the commutation. I mean, and you know, and it's I guess it's just me, but I find it odd that men who assaulted police officers had their sentences commuted by or outright pardoned by a Republican president. No Democratic president, I think, would do it, but no Republican president to date would do such a thing. I want to show you one clip just to introduce this topic. So the man in the video with the pole is named Scott Miller, and he was one of those pardoned. He was beating a police officer in that video, and you know, I just am so surprised. I think it's the only thing that maybe surprised me this week that that this would happen. Ashley, can you explain the new reality to us?
Well, first, you're not the only one who's surprised. I mean, there were Republicans who, including his own vice president, who previously got out in front and said, of course he's not going to pardon the people who committed the actual violence. Just
to be clear, you mean J.D. Vance, his new vice president, not the old vice president who
they
was
threatened with death.
Yes. Okay, no, I just want to make sure. J.D. Vance said 10 days ago or so.
Yeah. He did not expect that the people who committed acts of violence against the police officers would be pardoned. That was the view of a lot of Republicans. That's the first thing. But the new reality in many ways is the old reality, which is that sort of almost immediately with Trump, almost immediately after January 6th happened, there was this whitewashing process to tell the public that what they saw, that clip you just showed, what people saw when they were in the Capitol, what these Republican lawmakers experienced when they were running for their lives, in many cases, what people watched on their TV screens hadn't really happened or wasn't as bad as they thought it was. And that is the reality Trump has the false reality, but it is the reality he has been trying to push that was part of his political comeback really since that deadly attack on the Capitol. And so by that logic, you can see why Trump, by sort of pardoning and exonerating all of these people, these were the people who he urged to go march on the Capitol. In some ways, he seems to be trying to exonerate himself and pardon his own behavior from that day.
He called it a day of love. Is that correct? Yeah. The Leanne, you watched the Republican caucus carefully, and you were also, I should note, in the Capitol on January 6th. You experienced this directly. What are you hearing from Republican leaders this week about the pardons?
So Republicans are, well, publicly, they're not saying that much about it. Privately, Republicans are uneasy about it. They're queasy. They think that he went too far. They were not, as Ashley said, expecting the ones who actively beat police or were charged and convicted of serious crimes to also be pardoned as well. It's not even just the more centrist moderate Republicans who are saying that, but even those who are more in Donald Trump's corner. Privately though. But there's also a caveat to that. They are trying to justify it at the same time by pointing to President Biden's just, a couple days prior, pre-pardons of his family. They're pointing to the pardon or commutation, I can't remember which, of Leonard Peltier, who was convicted decades ago of killing 2 FBI officers. So there's a lot of both sidisms as well.
Right. I want to talk about the Biden pardon, which came minutes before he gave up the presidency, had to leave the presidency in a moment. But just coming back to this, these, and I was there too, we all reported on this in one way or another. These are Republicans who were at the time appalled, first of all, fearful.
Yeah.
Scared.
They ran for their lives.
They ran for their lives.
Yes.
Is not, that's a literal truth.
Yeah.
Anybody, to your knowledge, of the Republicans in the Senate and the House, anybody say anything publicly saying this was a bad thing and we shouldn't let these guys out of jail?
Not forcefully, that I'm aware of.
Murkowski did put out a statement saying
and Susan
condemning.
Collins
And I think Tom Tillis
put out a statement, and Tom Tillis was saying that's something he didn't agree with. But look, these are the people who
We're used to them.
We are used to them.
Right.
And so, but the fact that there was these people who, the day after the night of January 6th, they were done with Trump. They thought that this was the worst attack on democracy. They thought that this was a major threat to democracy. And it wasn't until, as Ashley pointed out, this years-long attempt to change the narrative from making these people criminals to victims.
Go ahead, Leigh.
It's revisionist history, and I wasn't necessarily that surprised, only because Donald Trump had been saying almost the entire campaign, I am your retribution, as you said. I want revenge. He called them hostages. He never said explicitly that he was only going to pardon a certain amount. He talked about them in big groups and as though they were all being treated poorly and that they were all being held in horrible conditions and that they didn't deserve the justice that was served to them. So,
hostages.
Yes, hostages.
Well, there's an
was the word
amazing
he used
moment.
over and over again.
There was an amazing moment in all of this when he was meeting with the families of Israeli hostages of Hamas, and he equated those hostages seized from their homes by a terrorist organization and held for a year and a half to people who were convicted in American civilian courts of violent crimes, and said hostages are hostages are hostages.
Who were sometimes turned in by their family members who were so appalled at what they saw.
Right.
But I think what's so stunning about what happened was that, yes, and 1,500 total. The fact that the leader of the Proud Boys, the leader of the Oath Keepers were released, and that now they are emboldened and they are essentially looking to rebuild their far-right extremist groups. They're looking to recruit. The former law enforcement that I've spoken to, including ones who served in DHS under the first Trump administration,
Homeland Security,
are incredibly concerned about the threats of potential violence, that these actors will go out on their own or inspire people to go out on their own with their tough talk to then carry out their own acts of revenge.
If I could build off that, there's a way in which this was a huge risk for Trump. We've seen from the right that of the millions of people in the United States, if one undocumented migrant in some random town commits a crime, it becomes a cause celeb and it becomes famous and notorious and everyone keeps talking about it, even in a vast country when there's always something going on. There's now 1,500 plus people who have shown themselves to have extraordinarily poor judgment, let's say, at a minimum. Plenty of people didn't like the outcome of that election and didn't go beat up cops and storm the Capitol that day. These people did. As you say, they're now emboldened and any acts of violence or crimes that these people, just one or two of them commit, Trump is going to own.
Well, it's interesting. The so-called shaman, the famous the horn guy, he was pardoned, and the first thing he said was that he was going to go out and buy some guns. I mean, so the emboldening is there. To be fair to the shaman, he also said that he was going to go buy some weed, which militates against taking action in a gun store. Or militates against taking action in anything. But nevertheless, they know that they're operating under essentially the protection, because if you could get a pardon now, why can't you get a pardon 3 years from now, something you haven't done yet, as long as Trump is president?
And Donald Trump also said earlier this week, which I think was kind of, again, with all the news, gets buried, but he said, he suggested that maybe there's a place in politics for the Proud Boys, that there's a place in politics for
Stand back and stand by, I think, was the expression. Charlie, let me ask you this, because the subject of the Biden pardon came up. Very few people like that pardon. Very few like the Biden pardons, including in the Democratic Party, but especially this very last minute pre-pardon of family members. Do you think that is connected in any way to the subsequent January 6th pardons? In other words, that was the permission structure changing. Well, if Biden is going to do it, I'm going to go even further.
I mean, it certainly provided a what about excuse, as we were hearing from the Hill.
Yeah.
But honestly, I think Trump was going to do what he was going to do regardless.
Yeah. What are the consequences? And I want to talk to you about rule of law generally, but what are the consequences of that Biden pardon, that last minute pardon, for the idea that no one is above the law in America?
I mean, a pre-pardon for people who have not been charged with a crime yet and not even suspected of a crime. I mean, it depends on how we think about it. If we put this in the category of Trump is coming, he is going to weaponize DOJ as he's promised to do, and bring charges against his political enemies as a matter of just grievance score settling, and even when there's not really a crime there, a basis for opening an investigation, then this was an extraordinary but sadly weird, unique to this moment in time thing.
Right.
But if you think that those guys, there really was something there, and that to have a blanket pardon for anything that happened, going back 10 years in the case of Hunter Biden, for example, it's really, there's no limits the Constitution puts on a president's clemency powers, and it's one of those powers that's just ripe for abuse because of that.
Right.
And we're just seeing norms of self-restraint melting away.
There's also a political element to this, too, even though Trump's not going to be running for re-election, we think.
So you say.
Not only did he campaign on this, but also Democrats partially also campaigned on January 6th. And this was a closing argument of Kamala Harris's campaign, and it didn't work. And so there is an acknowledgement that for Trump, that this is something that is politically viable in this moment.
And lastly, on the pardons on the Democratic side, also, there's a lot of frustration from Democrats who sort of felt like, they believed that Democrats were better than this. And a lot of Biden's closing argument was also sort of upholding standards and norms of democracy, and they believe those pardons undermine that. And then there's another sense of frustration from Democrats, which you see publicly and privately, that he did that last batch of pardons, but it was quite small. And there's a lot of other people, if you believe, as Charlie said, that Trump is going to keep his promise to weaponize the Department of Justice and go after people, why limit it to such a small group? There's a lot of other people, like Cassidy Hutchinson and Olivia Troy. There's any number of people who do not necessarily have the financial means or the connections the way, say, a General Milley or an Anthony Fauci does to protect themselves. If you're going to do it, if you're going to violate these precedents that you said you were not going to violate, why not just protect everyone is another thing I've heard.
Yeah.
If I could,
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
If I could add just 2 quick points on this. I mean, when you ask about consequences, there's a bit of irony in that Donald Trump and Republicans for so long said, we just want to put January 6th in the past. We don't want to talk about January 6th. Democrats want to talk about January 6th. And now it's not just ending with the pardons. Republicans are launching their own investigations on the Hill. The Justice Department is launching its investigation into the January 6th investigation.
Investigations of investigations.
Investigations of investigators. And then also in terms of consequences, not to hammer this point, but we have a historical parallel for what happened before when 14 white supremacists in 1988 were acquitted of seditious conspiracy, and then it revitalized the far-right groups across the country, and that led to the Oklahoma City bombing.
Right.
So there is historical parallels.
Right. Interesting point. We should talk about that in future shows because this is not going away. Charlie, I want to turn to the broader picture here, Trump and the rule of law. You've been covering a lot of these issues, and I'm wondering, simply put, what is the thing that, apart from the January 6th pardons, what's the thing that's most surprised you about some of these executive orders so far?
Well, so as I was processing that blizzard of executive orders that Trump signed on the night of Inauguration Day, suddenly dozens are showing up. He was sitting in the Oval Office, stack after stack after stack. It's very different than 8 years ago. I think he issued 4 executive orders in his first 5 days.
Most of that first day was Sean Spicer trying to defend outrageous claims about crowd size.
They knew what they were doing this time.
This time
was
they were
well
ready.
prepared. This was scripted. These things were written. And he was really pushing at the limits of legitimate executive authority with some of them. The pardons we've just been talking about, as I just said, may not be a good idea, but there's no doubt he could do that. The Constitution clearly lets the president do that. Some of the stuff that's in these executive orders is quite different. For example, it all seems like a million years ago we were talking about TikTok, but he's directing the government to essentially suspend this law that was passed by bipartisan majorities in both houses of Congress, signed by President Biden, upheld unanimously by the Supreme Court just a couple days ago, and he said, we're just going to suspend it. It doesn't exist. How does he have the power to do that? The Constitution says the president shall take care the laws be faithfully executed. He's just doing it. He's invoking commander-in-chief powers to in some of his immigration actions. He's saying we're going to treat migrants as invaders. He's activating NORTHCOM to develop a military campaign on domestic soil.
The word invasion is used very deliberately in some of these documents. Laura, I want to ask you about the immigration. He ordered an end to birthright citizenship.
Attempted to.
Well, he ordered it, and then very predictably, because it is in the Constitution, a judge, a Ronald Reagan-appointed judge, said, what are you doing? You can't do that. So any lawyer, any first-year law student knows that any judge is going to put a stop to that, or at least a temporary block on that. So what's going on there?
Why do it?
Why do it?
Well, because supporters and allies of Donald Trump who once were considered more on the fringe, whether it's Stephen Miller or John Eastman, a lawyer from California, who wanted, this is their project. They had long wanted to challenge birthright citizenship, and Trump said, okay, let's do it. I was told by a source close to the White House that some inside want this to be successful. Some inside the White House want this to be successful. Some inside the White House want this to go to the courts and get killed, so then that way they never have to touch it again, because they don't believe that They accurately say that in the Constitution it says that he doesn't have the
A
ability
pragmatically
to.
futile attempt to overturn the Constitution.
So, but I think with others, the Trump White House is looking forward to the court challenges, whether it's in immigration, not necessarily connected to birthright citizenship, or whether it's in whether or not they can take back some of the power of the purse from Congress. They want to be able to use what's known as impoundment authority to disperse federal funds however they see fit, and they want that challenge to go to the Supreme Court, and they hope that with some of these that they're able to get favorable rulings.
Ashley, where are the Democrats in all of these controversies? I mean, this is not 2017 with mass rallies and protests, but it just doesn't seem as if the Democratic Party is coming out in force to say, oh, you know what, maybe don't let the leader of the Proud Boys out of jail.
I mean, am I allowed to say it that the Democrats are in disarray?
Yes, you are allowed to say the Democrats.
They said that they are.
Democrats
said that
continue
they
to be in disarray.
I mean, you're right. What is so striking is this sort of very forceful and energizing resistance that Democrats put up for so long has dissipated, at least in this moment. And when you look at what they're saying and when you talk to them, some of them are kind of candid about they're trying to regroup and retrench, right? They just lost an election. There's, as we're talking about, which is what Trump always does, this shotgun off fire hose of things, which is even just from a political messaging standpoint, which one do you go after? Is it immigration? Is it the pardons? Is it withdrawing from the World Health Organization or the Paris Climate? You know, so they are regrouping, and Democrats also are in a bit of an effort to reconstitute the party where Donald Trump and Republicans were able to claim a lot of the policies of Democrats as their own. I mean, if you look back when Biden was the nominee, it is so striking that Scranton Joe ceded being the advocate of the middle class and the American worker to Donald Trump, that Donald Trump was able to take that mantle from him. And that's something Democrats are trying to grapple with, too.
So quickly, who is going to lead the Democrats into array then? who are it doesn't seem like anybody's sort of remotely ready to seize the mantle of direction and leadership. Obviously, there are the so-called normie Democrats. You hear Alyssa Slotkin and people like that talking about, let's not talk about identity thing, race, gender. Let's not obsess about, let's just talk about the things that people want to talk about. But is there anybody yet you've seen who said, oh, I'm going to take this by the horns and deal with it?
I mean, I think the thing I've heard the most, and again, this is more from the normie Democrats, is this effort to wrest the party back from the activists and from the groups. And
the so-called groups.
The so-called groups. And I've heard people say the next time a group says, you know, if you don't take this sort of very out of the mainstream leftist position, we're going to blast you in a primary, the answer should be, okay, so blast us, because we don't all want to be, if you're a Democrat, standing up on stage and raising your hand for something that will get you killed in a general election.
Right. One more topic I want to raise, and obviously there are a million topics brought up by these actions this week, but President Trump's decision to pull security off of three figures, his former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, his former National Security Advisor, John Bolton, and his former advisor on Iran, Brian Hook, all of whom are under death threats from the government of Iran. These are people who all work for Donald Trump. They got on Donald Trump's bad side for one reason or another. Leanne, this is way, way, way outside the norm of Washington behavior. Yeah. How much danger are these men in? And are there people in the Republican caucus and Republicans on the Hill who are saying, you can't do that? They're under, go on.
I mean, so I don't know how much danger they are in. I'm not talking to intelligence officials, but what I will say is Trump promised retribution, and this is it. It's not just retribution for Liz Cheney and Democrats, but it's retribution for people who have wronged him, and this is one way that he's able to use his strings to do that. This is not something that has come up on Capitol Hill. I will say, like we all are, Republicans and Democrats are drinking through a fire hose right now. Every single aide that I talk to is literally exhausted and overwhelmed and cannot even jump from one topic to another. So I think that this is not even resonating yet on Capitol Hill. And Charlie, you might have a lot more on the
Charlie, let me give you the
intel side.
I'll give you the last word if you can answer the question. Is this so far out of the bounds of what a Washington norm traditionally has been that people don't even have the language to deal with the fact that the president is cutting these guys adrift when they carried out his order to assassinate Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian terrorist leader?
I mean, it's well put. I can't build on that much, but it's not just about, I think, bullying people that he's decided were once his minions, but criticized him in some way and now are out of the tent. But it's also about striking fear in his current minions that they better not do anything but toe the line, because look what happens when you're out of the tent. You're really out of the tent. And the physical danger aspect of that resonates for me with what Mitt Romney and others talked about during the second impeachment, where Republicans supposedly were saying to each other they wanted to vote to convict Trump, but they were afraid for their own physical safety and that of their family after January 6th.
And a reason Mitt Romney did not endorse Kamala Harris.
Right, exactly. Unfortunately, we need to leave it there for now. It's been a great conversation, and I want to thank our panelists and our viewers for joining us. I'm Jeffrey Goldberg. Good night from Washington.
Corporate funding for Washington Week with The Atlantic is provided by...
In 1995, two friends set out to make wireless coverage accessible to all. With no long-term contracts, nationwide coverage, and 100% U.S.-based customer support. Consumer Cellular. Freedom calls.
Additional funding is provided by Koo and Patricia Ewan for the Ewan Foundation, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities. Sandra and Carl DeLay Magnuson, Rose Herschel and Andy Shreves, Robert and Susan Rosenbaum, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.